In this section, the author looks at other banks, other central banks beyond the Federal Reserve. One of those is the European Central Bank, and all of these countries here use the euro as currency, whereas these four countries have their currency tied to the euro. There are several European countries that have opted out of the Union, and they are listed at the bottom. The governing structure of the euro system is very similar to that of the U.S. Another important central bank is the Bank of England. It's been around since 1694, but became state-owned in 1946. It's a private corporation and is the bank for the British government, just like the Fed is the bank for the U.S. government. The Bank of Japan is another important central bank. It's been around since 1871, but in 1997, the Bank of Japan Act was rewritten to give the Bank of Japan more independence. In the final section of the chapter, we'll look at two questions. What is central bank independence and why is that important? And why do independent central bankers prefer lower inflation rates than government officials? For an independent central bank to be considered independent, these are all factors that need to be in place. The country has to abide by the rule of law. The central bank has control of its own budget. It was established by law or treaty. It has appointed officials, long-term offices, and non-renewable terms of office. Central banks tend to be tougher on inflation than government would be, and that's because central banks tend to represent banks and businesses, and they realize that inflation is something that slows growth, creates uncertainty, and also hurts the bankers. Whereas the politicians and the government, they're not so upset by inflation because they've got tools that they can use to combat it. That being monetary stimulus, fiscal policies, and other tools that they can use to kind of combat inflation. And you can see here are two quotes. One was from Paul Volcker, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, and the other one from Jimmy Carter, former U.S. president. And I'll put this up for a few seconds to let you read the quotes. But these quotes illustrate the differing views on inflation between someone who works for a central bank and someone who is a government official. Okay, that's basically an overview of Chapter 10. I did post an additional video in Moodle for you. It's actually one that we watched in class about the history of banking in the U.S. If you weren't in class that day, make sure that you take a look at it. Also, if you were in class, by viewing it now, after we've had the chapter on the role of the central bank, I think the video might make a little bit more sense. So feel free to watch that. It's at your option, but it's just additional education that I think would supplement the chapter. Take care.